So tonight's focus is going to be on responses to the environment, both with individual organisms. We're going to do some examples with animals, some examples with plants, and there will maybe some vocabulary in here that maybe you haven't experienced before. So organisms are going to be responding to environmental cues for a variety of reasons. They're going to need to try to maintain homeostasis, so to maintain that constant internal environment. They're going to need to respond to the environmental cue for signals about growth as well as signals about reproduction. For instance, you have organisms that most organisms respond at certain times of the year, and reproduce at certain times of the year, and they know when it's time to reproduce based on environmental cues that they're receiving, temperature changes, humidity changes, that kind of thing. So behavioral and psychological mechanisms are used to respond to change, to those environmental cues. So for instance, behavioral changes. You can see that occurring over here with these these two male elk here. Okay, due to the environmental cues, they're going to have a behavioral change. It looks like they're about to fight for either a mate or for space. Okay, physiological changes can also occur in response to the environmental cues. And so between those two things, the organism is able to maintain homeostasis. Organisms are going to exchange information with one another, okay, in response to these internal and external cues. And that can then influence behavior. So in addition to the environmental cue that is signaling one organism to respond in a way can then trigger the next organism to respond based off of the first organism's response. So the exchange that happens between organisms also can influence behavior. For example, let's say this first elk here is the one that basically initiated the aggression. Well, the information exchange that he's having with this second elk is that they are going to fight for this female or for the space. But it's all going to be due to a response to the environmental cues from the first elk. Let's look at an example of this happening with plants. So hopefully we remember phototropism from freshman year, where the plant is growing toward the light. So the plant senses the light, okay? And so that light is going to be, that's my environmental cue, okay, is the light, whether that's light from a lamp or light from the sun, but there's my environmental cue. And so the tip of the plant senses the light and produces the hormone auxin. You can see in this experiment down at the bottom. Okay, so this experiment down at the bottom kind of was showing how this occurs. So this is my control here. So this is my plant that's been unaffected. So here's my environmental cue of the light coming in. The tip of the plant here produces the auxin. It also will produce growth inhibitors. So this is an example of a plant doing cell communication. Okay, I've got a hormone auxin that's being produced in the tip of the plant. It's going to travel to other parts of the cell, and it's going to cause cell signaling cascades and pathways. It'll bind to receptors, and that will then trigger certain responses within the plant. So the auxin is going to travel down the plant, stimulating the elongation of cells. So some cells are going to grow faster on the side away from the light. So in this control here, you can see these cells along this side here, they're responding to the auxin. Okay? They're responding to the auxin, and they're elongating in response to that environmental cue, which was the light. Growth inhibitors, you can see up here, growth inhibitors are also mentioned. Growth inhibitors are released on the side of the plant closest to the light so that it won't grow as fast. This is what's going to allow the plant to bend. You've got one side stretching out and one side basically stops growing. This is going to be a physiological response or a physiological mechanism responding to this environmental change, which was the light. Okay? The rest of this experiment was to kind of like those DNA experiments that we talked about before, but the rest of this experiment was done to confirm that the plant released hormone, that it had to have a response from the light, it had to have the part where the hormone is made from, and then the hormone had to be able to travel. For instance, the second plant here, the tip has been removed. Well, the tip is where the auxin is made. So if no auxin is being made, then I'm not stimulating those cells to get longer, so it's not going to bend. Okay? The third one, the tip is covered by the opaque cap. So opaque meaning nothing can get through. So now I don't have my environmental cue getting through. I have a tip that could make auxin, but since light can't get to the tip, it doesn't know to make auxin. The one with the transparent cap shows me that whatever the molecule is, in this case auxin, but whatever the molecule is that causes the plant to bend towards the light, okay, it comes from the tip. This next one backs that up because the tip is uncovered, but there's opaque at the bottom. So this is all providing support that the tip is where the chemical signal is produced. The next to last one shows a tip being separated by a gelatin block, where the last one shows that the tip is separated by mica. Basically, the tip is separated by something that is permeable versus something that is impermeable. So all of this leads support to the fact that the auxin is produced in the tip, it travels down the plant, and then that's how the plant will respond. So let's look at some examples in animals here from environmental cues. So animals can have two basic movement type responses, okay? Kinesis and taxis. So kinesis, I've got to change an activity, okay, in response to a stimulus. So let's look at the example here with cell bugs, which most of you probably know is like roly-polies. Okay? They're more active in less humid areas and less active in humid areas. Okay? So what we mean here is that their activity level is changed based on the environment. They don't move toward humid environments or move away from humid environments, but their activity level changes based on the environmental cue. So that's my kinesis. My taxis is going to be, I'm going to have some kind of oriented movement, and this oriented movement is going to be toward or away from the stimulus. So I can have a positive taxis where I'm moving toward the stimulus, or I can have a negative taxis where I'm moving away from the stimulus. So an example here, you can see this in the picture here. Okay, the rheotaxis in trout. So that's based off of the direction of the river current. And so what will happen is the trout will orient themselves upstream or toward the current, like this trout here is doing. And it's moving in response to the stimulus. It's moving either toward or away from the stimulus. So in this case, it's an example of a positive movement, positive taxis, where it's moving towards the stimulus. And this is beneficial to the fish to move toward the current because it helps keep them from getting swept away, and it helps them face the direction the food will be coming from. So basically they just need to open their mouth and food will just come in it. Both of these are examples of a behavioral change in response to that environmental change. So let's look at another example with plants. So how plants will respond to herbivores, or basically to being eaten. So plants can have chemical defenses. They release what are called secondary metabolites. Secondary metabolites are basically poisons. Okay? They're toxic to herbivores. Okay? Or they're either toxic or they decrease digestibility of the plant. So even if the organism is able to eat the plant without getting poisoned, it can't really digest it. Therefore, they'll probably stop eating it. So secondary metabolites will be produced by herbivores, trying to get those consumers to either basically get poisoned or to stop eating them because they can't digest them. Another example of plant response to the environment would be thigmonastic movements. You see that happening with, for instance, those little tomato plants there. So thigmonastic movements are in response to touch or vibration. Okay? What this does is it's going to decrease that surface area of the leaf. Okay? So when an insect lands on the leaf folds up in half. I think most of you have probably seen that. Okay? That would be an example of our thigmonastic response. Okay. In addition to those, we've got examples of organisms that are able to exchange information to change behavior. For example, the plant giving into the herbivore, okay, so it stops feeding on it. I think I said into first a second ago, not info. So the plant, for instance, that those secondary metabolites, that is information that the plant is giving to the herbivore, and that discourages the herbivore from feeding on it. Okay, the thorns on the plant here, that's information, that's an environmental cue to the herbivore that it should stop eating that plant. Okay, and so that's again that exchange of information between the organisms within the environment. These behavioral responses can affect the organism's overall fitness. Remember, their fitness there is ability to contribute to the gene pool, right? Their ability to pass their DNA on to future generations. And so these behaviors can help increase their overall fitness and can affect the success of the population by increasing its fitness. Individuals can also act on info and communicate it to others. So they can communicate information from one individual within the population to another via signaling behaviors through visual, audible, tactile signaling cues, signaling signals, chemical signals. Okay? All of these things can help indicate, they can indicate where food is found. They can establish dominance or hierarchy within a pack of organisms. They can help establish territory. They can help with reproductive success. Okay? All of those being signals that allow the organisms to communicate with one another. The example on the right, you can see smell, acoustic signals, the visual with the red under the lizard there. All of these being different kinds of signals between organisms. These organism responses can have an influence on natural selection. So natural selection is going to favor the innate being that this is a developmentally fixed behavior. It doesn't matter about internal, external differences. This behavior is going to occur because it is basically a built-in behavior. Okay, so natural selection will favor these innate behaviors as well as learned behaviors, so behaviors that the organism will learn as it grows and develops. They can increase survival as well as reproductive fitness. So it can encourage selection for organisms. There are also cooperative behaviors, so where the organisms are working together. You can see the bees working together in the hive here, the wolves working together to try to trap their prey. So these cooperative behaviors, that can also increase the fitness of the individual as well as the population. So it may be difficult for the one wolf to bring down some prey all by itself, but as the pack cooperates and work together, it is beneficial to the individual, so it will get food, as well as to the population as a whole. So let's look at what's going on here with these plants, these flower color examples. Okay, so in this example, okay, we've got insects and birds, and they pollinate different colored flowers. They're attracted to different colored flowers. So you can see on the left, the bee is attracted to the purple flower, where on the right, what looks like a hummingbird is attracted to the red flower there. So the flower is going to need the pollinator for reproductive success. It needs this organism to come help spread the pollen around so it can be successful in reproduction. And so this would be an example of a signal. Okay, so the color is the signal here. So of a signal that's going to change the behavior of the pollinator. So the visual stimulus of the red plant makes the bee not go towards it, where the visual stimulus of the purple plant makes the bird not go towards it. In animals, an example we have here is predator warning calls. So we have this type of monkey here, these Vervet monkeys. Okay, they have different kinds of warning calls depending upon the predator. So one call for snakes, one for eagles, one for leopards. And so as the monkeys get older, they learn the differences so that they can make the appropriate call for a particular predator is nearby, and they know the appropriate response to the curve. So what you can see here, for example, is this young monkey, okay, making the signal that the eagle predator is nearby. And as it's learning, the adult monkeys will also make the noise. So it knows what was the appropriate call to make for the eagle being present. So these kinds of behaviors can also be examples of altruistic behaviors. Okay, so altruistic behaviors, these are going to be what are considered selfless behaviors. So it could possibly reduce the individual fitness. So for example, with the monkeys, the monkey giving the alarm call attracts some attention to itself. So it can actually reduce its individual fitness. However, it increases the fitness of the others that are within the population. By warning the rest of the group, okay, it can help the others escape, but it can also pinpoint the caller's location for the predator. Okay, so these would be these signals for the predators would be considered altruistic behaviors. An example of an audible signal that's going to ensure this reproductive success, okay, it would be basically the fact that they don't die. So this time I had an audible signal that was occurring, okay, and it's helping increase fitness by increasing reproductive success because they didn't die. Where the previous example with the plant was an example of a visual stimulus, okay, helping the plant be reproductively successful. Courtship and mating behaviors are another example of behaviors that can alter fitness of the organism. The example we're looking at here is birds of paradise, so a particular type of bird in the mating dance that they do. And so this mating dance helps them get a compatible mate, a receptive and genetically compatible mate. And so it can highlight, by doing this dance, it can highlight the benefits, the strengths of the male, its health, its intelligence, its physical capabilities, its strength. And this dance, this behavior has both innate, so characteristics or components that it was born with, as well as learned components. Okay? And so this would be an example of a behavior that's increasing reproductive fitness. So by doing this behavior, the male is able to attract a mate, therefore it's increasing its reproductive fitness. The last behavior that we'll look at here is herd behavior in animals. So herd behavior in the animals is important when they're escaping a predator. So what will happen is all the individuals will try to move to the center. And so it becomes difficult then for the predator to distinguish a single organism, because what will happen is it'll look like one large animal all moving together. And so this is an example of a cooperative behavior, but this cooperative behavior actually is going to increase both the fitness of the individual and the survival of the population. The individual alone is more likely to survive by doing this cooperative behavior, as well as the population as a whole. So we'll look at more examples of these, practice with writing about these kinds of animal behaviors, practice scenarios and multiple choice and such in class.